Good morning and welcome to the February 18th meeting of the Probus Club of Burlington, our 8th meeting being held by Zoom to keep everyone safe, entertained, and informed. I want to firstly acknowledge and welcome the following 4 meeting guests this morning. I won't ask them to stand because we don't need to see their belts or whatever's underneath their belts. Firstly, John Flynn is a guest of Cliff Baker. If you'll maybe wave when I say your name there, good. Bill Valcour is a guest of Jack Fernahoff. Cliff Dakers is a guest of Graham Schaefer. And Barry Hunter is a guest of Jim Annis, me. Please give a clap for all of our guests today. Thank you. A quick historical fact for you to ponder. In the late 1700s, maybe some of you remember that, many houses consisted of a large room with only one chair, commonly a long, wide board folded down from the wall, and was used for dining. The head of the household always sat in the chair while everyone else ate sitting on the floor. Occasionally, a guest, who was usually a man, would be invited to sit in the chair during a meal. To sit in the chair meant you were important and in charge. They called the one sitting in the chair the chairman. Today in business, we use that expression or title as chairman of the board. Who knew? I have a number of updates and items of interest before we get to our speaker this morning. During our phone call campaign to members in the latter part of February, we were made aware of 3 members who were not feeling well: Phil Strecker, Hugh Eisler, and John Pilling, who is with us today. So we wish each one of them a speedy recovery. And sadly, 2 of our members passed away recently. Bob Hawken passed away on January 11th and had been a member of Probus since 2009. And Walter Goldie passed away on the same day, January 11th this year, and had been a member of Probus since 2006. They will be missed by their family and by Probus. I ask for a moment of silence to remember Bob and Walter, and may their memories be blessed and eternal. Thank you. We are pleased that we have 2 new members to be inducted this morning, and I will call upon Bob Dickinson for the introductions. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Jim. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Ken Medland. Ken was born in Hamilton, Ontario in 1938 and has been married to Charlene for 52 years. They have 2 sons, Mike and Mark, and they have 6 grandchildren. Over the years, he's been very involved with the Burlington sports scene as a coach. He has coached hockey, baseball, football, downhill skiing, as well as coaching basketball for the Special Olympics. On the professional front, Ken has worked for Bell Canada, was a VP with Citibank Canada, and National Sales Manager with News Group Canada. He has traveled most of Europe, USA, Canada, and while cruising visited most of the islands in the Caribbean. In addition, he regularly attends Theatre Aquarius in Hamilton. Ken just can't get enough Probus, and as such, he's also a member of the Burlington Lakeshore Probus Club, where he is currently the membership director. Welcome, Ken. And next, I'm pleased to introduce John Mark, he goes by Jim, DeLisi. Jim DeLisi was born in 1949 and had French-Canadian parents. He lived and was educated in Northern Ontario. Prior to 1970, he lived in Ottawa and Toronto. Jim got married in 1976 and raised two children, one son, born in 1978, and one daughter, born in 1987. From 1970 to 2000, he lived in Hamilton and Stony Creek area, where he started a bookkeeping business in 1988. The business grew, and in 1994, Jim became an accountant. In 2000, Jim married Pauline from Kitchener and moved to the Cambridge area. He remained in Cambridge until 2011, when they moved to a retirement community in Port Rowan. In 2013, Pauline passed on, and he remarried in 2015 and moved to Paris in 2017. In 2020, he moved to Burlington. He is now a semi-retired accountant who still helps a few clients. For leisure, he enjoys golf, photography, and travel. Welcome, Jim. Welcome to both Ken and Jim to our Probus Club. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Bob. And to Ken and Jim, we welcome you to our Probus Club and wish you a long and happy membership. And to Jim, there are a number of us accountants in this club, so you can help us at tax time. As you are aware, we have been reminding our members that their fees for the 2021 calendar year were due. And I'm pleased to inform you that over 90% have paid to date, and we thank everyone for the effort and confidence in our Probus mission. And if you are part of the 10% and you have not already done so, then today would be a good day to submit your 2021 membership dues. We're always promoting and accepting applications for new members, and if you have a friend, acquaintance, neighbor, family member of the male gender, please contact our membership chairman, Bob Dickinson, and Bob can be reached through our website. This year, our annual general meeting of members will be held as part of our March 18th meeting. That's in 4 weeks. I want to thank those few people who stepped up to volunteer to be part of the management committee for the coming 21-22 year. You will all be receiving a notice of meeting as part of the March newsletter, along with the financial statements and the slate of officers to be elected. During the last weeks of February and early this month, members of your management committee held a telephone campaign to reach our over 115 of our members that had not logged into our monthly Zoom meetings. Of the members reached, about 45% said that they were watching the meetings on our YouTube channel. And that's, we don't have a log of people that go to our YouTube channel. So we want to know what our members were doing. So another 22% said they would try. And we felt that contacting these members by phone was a worthwhile undertaking, and it was appreciated by the members contacted. And personally, I got a lot out of talking to some of our members. My thanks go to all of our management committee for their time and volunteering for this. And now we're going to go to our speaker, and I'll call upon the chairman of our speakers committee, Kevin Harar, to introduce our speaker. Kevin.
Thank you, Jim. What a great turnout today. I was just looking at the participant list and I see a number 43, which I think is a record. So great. That means that we're all going to have a great talk today. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. David Galbraith. Before I do that, first a thank you to Warren, who's on the call today, Warren McRae, for proposing Dr. Galbraith as our speaker. Thanks, Warren. Now a few words about David. He's been with the Royal Botanical Gardens, RBG, for more than 25 years. He's the head of science there. He's been the head of science since 2006. He's also an adjunct professor in the biology department at McMaster. is a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. And this is most interesting. He's a fellow international of something called the Explorers Club, which I hadn't heard about. That is a prestigious club that has recorded a number of famous firsts, most notably first to the moon by members of that club, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. A very select club to belong to, David. Well done.
Thank you, Kevin.
Now for today's topic, the eco-park system. David, as you might expect, being a wildlife biologist by training, he loves nature and he cares deeply about the environment. This led him to become a driving force behind a major environmental project in the Burlington-Hamilton area, namely the development of the Coast to Escarpment Eco-Park System Alliance. Wow. For his valuable contribution to this effort, David was named Hamilton Environmentalist of the Year in 2010. This eco-park system, which includes the Royal Botanical Gardens, is big. It covers nearly 5,000 acres. That's more than 5 times the area of Central Park in New York, more than 10 times bigger than Hyde Park in London. It's a huge natural paradise in our own backyard. This morning, David is going to tell us all about it, what it is, what it has to offer, and what is being done to preserve, protect, and grow it. His presentation is entitled, Helping Threatened Nature Survive in the Peri-Urban Landscapes of Burlington and Hamilton, the Coats to Escarpment Eco-Park System. Over to you, David.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for the kind introduction. And good morning, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Hopefully the technical winds will align for us. Let's see. Are you getting the screen?
Yes, we are, David.
Good. Okay, thank you. Yes, well, it's marvelous to be here, and I will just make one minor change there. Yeah, as Kevin indicated, Royal Botanical Gardens is part of something that's called the Coats to Escarpment Eco-Park System. It's a long and boring name. We spent weeks and months trying to figure out a better one. It's what we've got right now. So let me just jump in and give you an idea of what this thing is about. As Kevin mentioned, this area is naturally rich. I think we take it for granted. We're also a very vibrant urban area. Lots of exciting things happening here, lots of business, lots of educational organizations, communities, transportation links. But all these things present a challenging situation for the nature in our area, because this area is also naturally very rich. So what I'd like to do this morning is just describe how we came to trying to create something we call a voluntary park alliance. This is not a single big park. It is an alliance of organizations that in turn all own and manage their own natural areas. So we're trying to do a better job together rather than to create one great big thing. Right now, we're in the middle of renewing our strategic plan, which was first launched in 2009, the current one that we're working on. So it's high time that that strategic plan be renewed. We're looking at new research and interesting new directions, which I'll touch on as we get toward the end. In the middle of this idea is that it's important to keep natural areas connected to each other. The way that people in our society conventionally manage bits of land is to put either metaphorical or real fences around them and say, this is my plot of land. I will decide what happens on this land and you can go and do what you want on your land. But natural systems don't recognize those borders. And we'd like to see what we can do to support those natural systems because they provide value to society. And if they fall apart because the landscape's been fragmented too badly, we lose that value. So again, hopefully everybody knows where we are. The border between Hamilton and Burlington, down here at the western tip of Lake Ontario. We're nestled along the end of the Ontario Greenbelt area. And in fact, the Greenbelt Foundation has been one of the supporters of our program from the beginning, providing us with very helpful support for some of our planning exercises. Now, I put this picture in for Tom. Tom, this is not up with you in Huntsville. Sorry. This is actually Hamilton Harbor. That's a northern diver, a common loon. Many people don't understand the degree to which we still have natural species and ecosystems right here in the middle of our urban area. But it's real, it's really quite wonderful. The Niagara Escarpment, of course, runs through our area. This is recognized internationally as a World Biosphere Reserve, one of 18 in Canada, as a place where there's wonderful natural beauty, but there's also people. A biosphere reserve means that there are people living in that ecosystem, they're part of it, they're deriving value from it, and they're supporting it. So again, a wonderful indication that even right through the middle of Hamilton and Burlington, there is something very special going on. Our area, and I'll touch on why Royal Botanical Gardens exists and why we are where we are, because it's actually part of the same long story, is that we're centered in several major watersheds. The Grindstone Creek watershed drains water down and much of western Burlington and Aldershot. Spencer Creek has tendrils going up nearly to Cambridge, into Cambridge on the west and the north. And the Red Hill Creek watershed drains down into Hamilton Harbor on the southwest. So there's a lot of connection through our area in the forms of creeks and ravines. And if we're thinking about how things stay connected in an urban landscape, those creeks and ravines become very important, as we'll see. Now, the protection of land in this area has a very long history. Cootes Paradise was declared a fish preserve in the 1880s. And in 1927, all of Cootes Paradise and a big chunk of Dundas, part of what's now Hamilton, was all described and declared as the Dundas Marsh Crown Game Reserve by the province of Ontario, at the same time that the city of Hamilton bought the land that's on this map in purple. And this was the south shore of Cootes Paradise Marsh. If you see over here, this block of land, which I hope you see the little cursor going around, that's the original campus of McMaster University. That purple land was the original land that was called Royal Botanical Gardens. RBG was created to protect Cootes Paradise Marsh. It was going to be a combination of a nature reserve, we didn't have conservation areas back then, and a botanical garden. And we've grown through that mission over the years to be a much bigger land area. This is about 377 acres. RBG is now 2,700 acres. And our goal is the protection of nature and the presentation of plants in horticulture for people, to bring those things together. Now, our biggest property is Cootes Paradise Marsh. In this photograph, which is looking south over RBG's Arboretum, you can see McMaster University in the top right, the town of Dundas over to the right side at the top. And this wetland is a natural wetland that's formed in the base of a feature in the escarpment called the Dundas Valley. This whole thing is tied into the Niagara Escarpment as well. And since time immemorial, Cootes Paradise Marsh has been used by people. It's not untouched nature in any sense. Today, it's used for recreational purposes. It's a very popular spot, even at this time of year, for skating. We have huge numbers of people showing up on Cootes right now for skating. We have archaeological evidence that people have been in this landscape for 9,000 years. Again, this is not the time frame we usually think of in Ontario, but all over Ontario, there are archaeological sites from between 13,000 years ago and 9,000 years ago. The earliest evidence we have of people in the area of Coutts itself is about 9. And after that, continuing evidence of people in the landscape using the natural resources up to the present day. Today, RBG consists of several large garden areas that, again, perhaps people are most familiar with in the outside world, but also a large set of natural lands. And the reason RBG owns these natural lands is to protect them and to present their educational value to the public in terms of the plants and animals that are present. That's one of our core missions. Sorry for the date on these slides, I'll have to update it. But as you can see from this map, RBG is not one property. We're about 12. There's several different patches of land with intervening land use between them. Some of the lands between these patches are owned by the conservation authorities. Up in Rock Chapel, for example, that brown slice is the Niagara Escarpment. Most of the land in here is actually owned by the Conservation Authority, Hamilton Conservation Authority. So it's well protected and it's well connected. Other lands are in private hands. Some areas are now in the Conservation Authority ownership up here, which I'll describe in a minute. And so our goal has always been, how can we work with everybody around us, private landowners, conservation authorities, other institutions, to keep these areas as green as possible? And it's a big job. To get a relative idea of the proportions of what's going on in RBG, I like this photograph that I took actually about 8 years ago, looking north over what's called the Lower Grindstone Creek Ravine, sometimes called Hendry Park. This is actually a former farm owned by William Hendry, who's a fascinating character who I haven't got time to talk about. But all this green land in the middle of this photograph is part of Royal Botanical Gardens. Over on the left, you can see some of our garden areas. This is the gardens of Hendry Park, RBG's Rose Garden, which was a centennial project. But this gives you an idea of the proportions of the built and parkland area that RBG has up against the nature sanctuaries. The nature sanctuaries are considerably larger. And despite this area being surrounded by the 403 to the north and Plains Road west to the south, and urban housing development and all kinds of things going on, this ravine is one of the richest places in Ontario for wildlife, right here in Aldershot. You can walk down on the trails, on the boardwalks on this site, and maybe you'll hear the 403 in the background. It's only a few hundred yards away, but it's very difficult to picture that this is in fact in Burlington. It's a wonderful space, very worthy of protection and restoration. Now, we know a lot about the landscape. Royal Botanical Gardens has embraced its role as a botanical garden for a long time, and that means studying plants. A botanical garden is always more than a public horticultural display, and we've had a terrific group of scientists working with us over the years. And I won't go into the specifics, but what we found over the past couple of decades is that we actually have more wild plants growing naturally at Royal Botanical Gardens than almost anywhere else in the country. This is in one way an accident. RBG was established to protect these lands, but this kind of information wasn't available 80 or 90 years ago. In fact, this year, 2021, is the 80th anniversary of RBG's incorporation, which was 1941. Prior to that, it had been a project of the City of Hamilton Board of Park Management and our founder, Thomas Baker McQuestion, for over 15 years. So it does have a long development. Anyway, but as you can see, here's some national parks in Canada, Georgian Bay Islands and Point Pelee. And up here is RBG, which is number of plant species for the area. There are some places with more plant species, and they're orders of magnitude bigger. And we've argued for a while that you could describe us sort of as a biodiversity hotspot, because we do have about a quarter of the national flora of Canada growing wild on our properties, and nearly 40% of the provincial flora. This is a place worthy of protection, even if it's surrounded by urban growth. So again, nature is not necessarily found only in remote places like where Tom finds himself living now, up in Huntsville, beautiful Huntsville. But it's right here in an urban area. At RBG alone, we have over 50 listed, 50 listed endangered species growing on those properties. Birds, fish, plants, amphibians and reptiles, even endangered mollusks. Listed endangered mollusks. These lands are precious in every way of describing them. We've got remnant populations of Carolinian forest species like the tulip tree growing wild on these properties. Canadian bloodroot, increasingly rare in a lot of landscapes. And there's even a species of plant that's found nowhere else in Canada on these properties. It's a very humble little plant. It's called the few-flowered clubrush. To give you an idea of how humble it is, it has another name, which is the bashful bulrush. But this species is as quiet and small. I mean, if you just see it, it looks like a tuft of grass. Unless you're a botanist and you can look at the flowers and actually determine it's a specific species. Nowhere else in Canada at this time. Used to be found at Rouge Park, disappeared 10 years ago. Now, there's been efforts going on for a long time to clean up the effects of society around these lands. Cleanup projects in Coutts Paradise Marsh started, for example, in the 1970s, some of them going to amazing extents to try to get things like rubbish out of Coutts Paradise Marsh. One of our biggest challenges are invasive species. And in 1997, this structure went online. This is the Coutts Paradise Fishway. It's basically a differential filter for live fish. Coutts Paradise has only one entrance and exit from Lake Ontario and Hamilton Harbor, underneath the bridge on the Burlington Heights. And with a lot of partners, this structure was built and it still functions, and its objective is to get the carp and turn them back to the harbor. Carp come into Coutts Paradise Marsh to try to spawn in the springtime. We turn them around and send them back to the harbor at the Fishway. There's all kinds of other ways we're working to restore these lands. The Fishway is a kind of a technological solution, but there's other ways of keeping invasive species out of nature. This example is using Christmas trees, which are tied down between pilings, but let water and small organisms move fairly freely, but can keep things like carp out of a sensitive wetland. And again, nature and people should go together, but go together in the right way. Here's a great example of restoration that's taking place in Coutts Paradise Marsh, which has a very strong cultural component. Prior to about 1,000 years ago, researchers who look at pollen grains in the wetland sediments tell us that Coutts Paradise Marsh was largely wild rice. This would have been an amazing natural resource for the people living in the area. And about 1,000 years ago, it switched over to cattails. But one of our projects is restoring, where it's appropriate, species that are still there, like the wild rice. It's also a great opportunity for learning. We take education very seriously at RBG. We often employ summer students and interns to help us out, doing exciting things like getting out in Coutts Paradise in waders and planting cattails. And this area, now on this photograph at the bottom there, you can see part of the McMaster campus. Everything to the north of the McMaster campus until you get to that road, which is York Road. That's all RBG land and Coutts Paradise. This is the most isolated area on our property, just opposite RBG. And this is part of a corridor that leads to the Niagara Escarpment. And what's interesting about that area is that this is where these guys live now. Over the past 10 years, we've had bald eagles start to nest in the area. This is a pair that's been nesting since 2013, right? Actually, a bit earlier than that. They had their first chicks in 2013. And right about now, middle February is when these guys should be laying their eggs this year. So we're keeping our eyes out for this. They're very remote. It's hard to get to. This photograph was actually taken with an astronomical telescope because they really don't like people near the nest. So, but this is, again, an indication of what's going on here is that there are no historical records of bald eagles nesting in Hamilton. This is an amazing top predator finding a space where they can live in an urban ecosystem. There's a lot going on in these ecosystems that provide them with stress. Climate change, nutrients from pollution, all kinds of other things. And I want to get onto the ecopark system, but we're all trying to look at these different stressors and understand how we can counter them. One of the biggest stressors comes from fragmentation of the landscape. In my introductory remarks, I noted that our way of dealing with things is to work with smaller and smaller pieces of land. And as a result, the bigger continuous forests have been cut down. We've built up all sorts of other wonderful uses of the land in between. But right now, these lands are primarily connected by things like the ravines that run north and south along the creeks. Here is a kind of high-level map of the immediate area. The big wetland off of Hamilton Harbor, here's Cootes Paradise Marsh. There's the MAC campus over here. Highway 6 runs north and south, so everything on the right is Burlington, everything on the left is Hamilton, pretty much. And you can see that these green swashes, which are the remaining contiguous protected lands, run along the ravines largely. So we started looking at this area and asking, how can we collaborate with the partners around us to keep those corridors open as much as possible, to accommodate and adapt to human activity, but also to keep the lands protected. We do know that one of the areas, for example, this darkest green blob here, these are the deepest protected areas in the region. This is that north shore of Cootes Paradise Marsh, and to the north, that's Rock Chapel. Our inventories of the Rock Chapel property suggest that RBG is losing natural plant species, probably because of things like fragmentation and invasive species. We want to try to address that. Even the partner agencies in this, the cities, the conservation authorities, RBG, and non-governmental organizations like the Bruce Trail Conservancy and the Hamilton Naturalist Club own a lot of land in this area, but it's all a patchwork. Those different colors represent different owners, and the purple going east-west. These are hydro corridors. So some of them are owned by Hydro One, some of them are on leased land, but they also provide important ways for organisms to pass east and west in our area. So we started talking about this in 2006 and asking, okay, everybody knows each other around the table. The conservation authorities are great guys. The cities are great guys. RBG, well, we're of course wonderful. But we haven't had a regular forum to ask questions together about protecting nature, about cooperating on things like recreational uses and trails, how we can find resources for doing things like ecological restoration. We want to do those things together. And we formed an alliance, a voluntary park alliance. It's 9 organizations: the Bruce Trail Conservancy, Conservation Halton, City of Hamilton, McMaster University, Halton Region, RBG, the Naturalist Club in Hamilton, the City of Burlington, and the Hamilton Conservation Authority are all around the table. And we had a terrific early boost from the involvement with the folks in the remedial action plan for Hamilton Harbor. They really were our organizing inspiration in the first 10 years of the project. And we've been looking for funding support for our planning and some of our technical work, and have found that in things like the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Greenbelt Foundation, which have been wonderful partners. So we set out together in 2007 and asked, how could we take care of the lands together? How could we look for new resources and opportunities together? We set ourselves a defining boundary, a very artificial and simple one, not based on any great scientific study or anything. It just seemed practical because our big focus is this connection between the wetlands, Cootes Paradise Marsh in particular, and the Niagara Escarpment. Now that's why this whole thing is called the Cootes to Escarpment Ecopark System. But this is not a big area. That map is maybe 20 kilometers by 8 kilometers wide. But look at all the different provincial planning areas that are present just within this area. Different acts at different times have brought forward different plans. They're complicated. And we all have to work within this to try to figure out what we can do with what we have where we are. I'm a big fan historically of Teddy Roosevelt and his conservation work, and that was one of his dictums. Do what you can with what you have where you are. And so we set out with the community. We started holding local public consultations. We talked with stakeholder groups about this idea of getting these organizations together and trying to connect the landscape. And we brought in the staff from all these different organizations who, again, are lovely people, but just didn't habitually talk to each other. This was a staff charrette for City of Burlington, for example. And we got out on the land with some of the local folks, with landowners. We walked the trails and with specialists talked about why that landscape, even though it's surrounded by urban land, is so important to protect. And we came out in 2009 with a strategic plan. And that strategic plan was adopted by all of the partners and agencies, all of their boards, and the city councils and Halton Region Council all agreed to the strategic plan by early 2010. So we had a vision statement. Those kinds of things are the things you always have to have these days. To have this area known as a protected, permanent, and connected natural land sanctuary from the harbor to the escarpment that promotes ecosystem and human health within Ontario's Greenbelt. And we're still working toward that vision. So in 2013, all of these organizations owned the land that you see here in green on this map. And once again, I've shaded the, I've shaded the utility corridors in brown, just because they are also such important connections. Here's Hamilton Harbor, Cootes Paradise Marsh. RBG owns the lands down here on the Grindstone Creek, around Cootes Paradise Marsh and up on the escarpment. But also there's Hamilton Conservation Authority land in here. There's Conservation Halton, City of Burlington, City of Hamilton, Halton Region. They all own land here. And we shade them like this all the time because, again, the wild organisms that we're interested in don't care whose property they are on. Ecosystems work on the basis of what's living on the land. And so when we try to study it from the perspective of the ecosystem, this is the kind of thing we look at. And just in the past 5 years, we've been able to add those additional blocks of land to the protected portfolios. That's about 150 new acres of land that better connect the Niagara Escarpment, which runs across here, to the wetlands to the south. So we've got a piece of property that's been purchased by Royal Botanical Gardens and also one by Conservation Halton in 2015. And the most recent nature sanctuary that's been added to the portfolio is in Aldershot. It's called the Sheila Dundooley Nature Sanctuary. Hamilton Naturalist Club now owns this property. And it was named after Sheila Dundooley, who provided the funding to purchase it. So we've been gradually doing this kind of thing, securing land where we can, where there is a willing buyer and a willing seller at market value. We do the research. Most of this land is not developable. It's ravine. It's some of it, the lower land, maybe floodplain land. So there are limits to what people can expect about property values. we have a third party who works with both any of our agencies who may have the resources to purchase land, and that's a rare thing. None of us have a lot of money going around, and landowners who may be willing to sell. We've also had land donated. There's a block here, I don't have it kind of animated, but right in the middle, there's a wonderful block of land here. This is the Eileen and John Holland Nature Sanctuary. It was owned by John Holland's family up until 2013. It's 37 acres with 2 ravines cutting straight through it, connected to a hydro corridor. The family had purchased the land decades ago with the possibility of it having a commercial application. That didn't quite work out for them. Years later, they started talking with the city of Hamilton about whether it might be donated to the city of Burlington, whether it might be donated to Burlington as a park for the city. Everybody liked the idea, but they didn't quite move it forward. But when the city of Burlington put their donation in the context of the eco-park system and said, you can absolutely donate the land to the city of Burlington, but we will put it into the portfolio of the eco-park system, they were thrilled because now it had an even bigger importance and a bigger context. It wasn't just 37 acres sitting on its own in the middle of Aldershot. Now it was part of this bigger network. So what we're trying to do is promote cooperation. We are entirely based on voluntary actions, not only amongst the 9 organizations around the table, but with everybody else. We do not have any authority to ask anyone to do anything other than what they might want to do. So we help individuals and organizations around us with voluntary stewardship, things like planting native plants in your gardens. We can help you with that. It better connects the landscape up. But as an organization, and it's only a loose group, there's no incorporated entity. The eco-park system does not own this land. This land is owned by the individual partner agencies, and they are all responsible for it as individuals. But what we try to do is express why this area is so important, express the value that's coming to society because of these protected lands, and voluntarily look for voluntary actions to try to protect them. We just received a wonderful grant from the Greenbelt Foundation. We haven't even gotten the contract written yet with a consultant, but one of our big projects will be to work with various sources of information and actually do the calculations to demonstrate what these lands are worth to the surrounding society in terms of their ecosystem values. So these are things like flood control and flood measures, the cleaning of waters, recreational opportunities. Even wildlife has a value to people, which can be calculated in things like opportunities to observe wildlife and interact with nature. So there's a whole stream of ecological thinking around those valuations. And for the first time, we've received a grant to work with the Greenbelt Foundation to express why these lands are so important in one way of doing that, which is through an expression of value. And restoration is so important as well. For example, this is RBG's newest property. It's now called Berry Tract South. It was a former farm field. And this was purchased in 2015. And we're already doing ecological restoration on the site, planting native shrubbery to control erosion, and looking at ways we can bring the vegetation on the site back to a natural state, something like a prairie or a meadow. And this is the kind of thing that's so exciting about these projects, because this is where we can go. Even if land has been significantly disturbed, it can be put back, it can be restored. This is Kerncliffe Park in Burlington, a former limestone quarry. It's been rehabilitated as a wetland. It's now a fantastic site to go and observe nature right in Burlington itself. So we know that people around us are going to keep doing what they can do on their lands for all kinds of reasons, for economic purposes, for their personal purposes. That's great. But what we hope is that people will think that this land is more than just their individual patch of land, but we can work together to keep the area vibrant and green. So in a nutshell, this idea is an effective and flexible collaboration mechanism among the landowning agencies. We're always looking for new ways for stakeholders and citizens to participate. And right now, for example, we're in direct touch with City of Burlington and with the City of Hamilton's Chamber of Commerce about dialogues with the private sector. We've had some great private sector involvement in the project so far. The most spectacular 4 years ago was the Day on the Bridge event, when Patrick Birmingham arranged to have the high-level bridge on the Burlington Heights closed for a day to hold a fundraiser to support land securement for this project. We're voluntary. We make decisions by consensus. We have no intention as a group or as individuals to tell anybody else what to do. But we've been able to make progress with that model. We don't take a vote, for example. We always ask, if we don't come to a consensus, we have more work to do. And we also have a strong framework for accountability for our decisions. The way we pay for our core is that each of the agencies actually puts a little bit of money into the kitty. And that gives us one employee and a bit of operating funding. Everything we do operationally, like helping with stewardship or doing research on land planning, we get third-party funding for from organizations like foundations. And we report directly back to the CEOs of all of the organizations involved. So we've got a fairly simple arrangement. It's not incorporated. It's entirely on the basis of a written agreement. But it's worked now for 8 years as that written agreement, and the collaboration's now in its 15th year. So I hope that helps you understand what it is this thing is, the Coutts-to-Escarpment Eco Park System. I'd like to thank Tom Weirschuk, who is our project coordinator. He works out of Royal Botanical Gardens, but on behalf of all the partner agencies. I want to thank those partner agencies who have been amazing as people and as organizations to work with. We try to come to common cause, and where it works, set aside the things that may be different between us. What's important is common cause. What can we agree on, and what can we build on from that? And we've had wonderful support from outside organizations. The Greenbelt Foundation, Trillium Foundation are just probably the biggest in terms of numbers, but there are lots of others as well. And thank you, everyone in Burlington Probus, for listening to my presentation today. And I'll turn it back over to our chair in case anyone has any questions. If there's time, I'm very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Galbraith. We will go to questions and answer, or we'll go to questions now, and Dr.
I'll try to
answer them. Just administratively, raise your hand, and Gary Hindley will try to see you with your raised hand, and then you'll have to take when Gary recognizes you for your question, you'll have to take yourself off mute. And then after you've asked your question, please put yourself back on mute. So, Gary, do we have a first questioner?
Yeah, Jim, I'm just going to let you know that I can only see about half the number of people. We've got a really good turnout today. So I'm going to ask Bob Dickinson if you'll watch page 1 for raised hands, and I'll watch page 2, and maybe we'll catch everybody.
Yep, good idea.
Yeah.
Thanks. Can you see anybody there?
I see Ken Bauman's got his hand up. Go
Okay,
ahead, Ken.
I'm off mute.
Yes.
I wanted to say that the expression "this too shall pass" seems fitting for the RBG. Dr. Galbraith, you talked about how you've had to deal with so many stressors like conflicting land use development and invasive non-native plants, and I think of the controversial cormorant and invasive fish like the carp. And I hear people are even now dumping their goldfish into Coutts Paradise. So I'm wondering, in your 25 plus years at the RBG, Dr. Galbraith, what would you say has been the most challenging negative stressor, and what are some hopeful signs for the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Those are really interesting questions. So first, the most important negative stressor, which I will interpret as being a form of stress on the natural systems and the landscape, as opposed to on our organization, which also experiences stress. Because RBG is a not-for-profit organization. We are not a government organization. So we get wonderful support from the province and the cities, but we're not for profit. I think the single most concerning issue we have is the arrival of new species in the landscape. Some of them could be considered invasive. That doesn't mean all newcomers are invasive. Ecologists actually have a very specific definition for invasion, which is a species that can enter a new habitat and take over in that habitat. There's all sorts of things that we've brought in the last 500 years that don't cause a whole lot of damage, but things like the carp are a big one. Interestingly, carp and goldfish can hybridize. They are actually biologically the same species. And so we actually get carp goldfish hybrids in Coutts Paradise, among other things. But it's not just the fish. We have an invasive grass in our area called Poa nemuralis, which is spreading across the forest floor in places like the south shore of Coutts Paradise and pushing out the native plants. That little plant I mentioned, the few-flowered clubrush, which is now only found on RBG's lands in Canada, its habitat is being pushed aside by this grass. And we're trying to do some experimentation to control the blue stem or the Poa nemuralis. But there's other examples. Common buckthorn is a bad one. That's a shrubby, woody plant that grows like crazy and spreads. We even have a few examples, and we're honest about this, of plants that have gotten loose from our gardens. This is a common problem for botanical gardens around the world. It's great to celebrate plants and move them around for some reasons, but sometimes we make mistakes, and we're working to make that better in terms of how we handle things. But a great local example in the area right around some of our properties is a nasty creature called dog strangling vine, black swallowwort. And we know that in the 1950s, one of our gardeners thought he was ordering myrtle from a horticultural catalog. Now, myrtle is also a plant that can get loose in natural areas. He thought he was ordering myrtle, and he got a pot, and it came to RBG, and he was, oh, this is myrtle. We got to plant this. It's such a beautiful plant. And it actually was dog strangling vine. And there are a few places close to RBG's properties where this species is now found, and we're pretty sure it got out from the gardens. So those examples are ongoing. The other thing that's layered on top of that, and it's related, is climate change. We're seeing outbreaks of organisms like the gypsy moth. And we're worrying about what gypsy moth is going to do in 2021 because we don't have the really cold winters anymore. To control gypsy moth, you need about a week where temperatures dip below -20 at night. And even with the cold snap we have right now, it may not get cold enough to knock gypsy moth back. So all kinds of organisms are moving north in response to what's happening in the changing climate. There's only so much we can do about that. We have to be realistic as well. But it is a big challenge to try to understand how change takes place, because natural systems do change. We can't just put a line around them and say, this is it, it's perfect the way it is. They are going to change. And we have to try to figure out what we can do to work with that change. That's a long answer, Ken. The thing that gives me hope in our area is, I think, the degree of cooperation. We have so many people who care about nature, about the land that they're living on. And that can be individuals, it can be organizations, it can be the private sector. And and we're seeing change. We're seeing, you know, it goes back and forth right now in terms of some of the political support, but things like the Ontario Greenbelt, you know, 30 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. There's all sorts of good reasons to have things like that in place. And we're working on some projects which hopefully will become better known publicly in the coming months and years, where we're trying to work with all kinds of organizations and get people thinking about green space in cities. Cities shouldn't just be what's called gray infrastructure, the concrete and the asphalt. People live in cities and people need greenery, whether it's a house plant or whether it's a local park or whether it's a larger park nearby, or whether it's something creative like the various kinds of agriculture that are being proposed on the sides of major buildings. Green space in cities is extremely exciting and really important, and it's kind of a get the right term. It's kind of a pre-existing condition for RBG. RBG was established to preserve green space in a city, and we see that as a part of our mission, and it gives me hope.
Next question.
Bob, I've got nothing on my side. How about you? Oh, I got Ramsey.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Galbraith, a very interesting presentation. What advice would you give to a homeowner who lives not in or close to one of the green areas on your map, but in the Aldershot area on, frankly, we back onto the bay? And one of the problems that we've had is getting good advice on native plants that we can plant along the shoreline on our property. There's a sort of a sense that there's a lot of people who know a little bit about this, but there are other people who seem to consider it not part of their job. Is there a clearinghouse? Is there one entity that we should consult for advice on these things?
Okay, first of all, Ramsey, thank you for your question. That's a really good one. We try to do some of that at RBG, and if you'd like to contact me, you're very welcome to, and I will make sure the question goes to the right place. If I had one particular piece of, I'm not sure about the edge going into the wetland or the wet edge of it. The one bit of advice for most urban homeowners in our area that can do more to protect biodiversity than anything else is to plant a native oak. Native oak trees are, when they get bigger, are absolute condominiums for wildlife. Insects on those trees are so important because if you like birds, they've got to eat something, and they're going to eat the bugs. And the place the bugs love to live are things like native oaks. So that's one idea. I don't have anything off the top in terms of suggestions for the water's edge, but I will put my email address on the chat. It's just dgalbraith@rbg.ca. And I'm very happy to try to be a little bit of a switchboard to connect you up. For example, we do a lot of plantings along the water's edge at RBG. And so we have some information about sources of plants. We also have some good connections to folks in our area that do stewardship. And we might be able to actually get you some direct help for that with our stewardship program. So please always feel free to drop me a line.
Thank you very much. I'll do that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
One of our new members, Jim Delisle, has a question, so take yourself off mute, Jim, and go ahead.
Okay, my question is regarding funding. As a member of the RBG, we donate so much dollars every year.
Thank you.
Where is that money going to? Is that money being just used for administration, or are there funds going to the projects that you're mentioning?
Okay, great question. We have a facility at RBG so that people can make an earmarked donation for the eco park system if they would like to. And those funds are kept in a specific fund that is only used by all the parties around the table to actually do program. So most recently, for example, we used some of those funds to help Conservation Halton purchase one of the properties that is in the middle of this eco park system. That's a main link for us. The secretariat for the eco park system is just one guy in an office at RBG, and all of the partner agencies around the table put a bit of money into the pot to keep that secretariat running. So it's a single position. And that comes from whatever general funding sources the organizations like to tap into. So we don't put eco park system earmarked support toward that secretariat function. The bigger scale about RBG is that as a charitable organization, we're accountable for what we raise funds for. I don't have the numbers off of the top of my head, but we do have, in general, a budget of about $16 million per year at RBG. About $4 million comes from the province of Ontario as an annual grant, about $750,000 from Halton Region, and about $650,000 a year, if memory serves, from City of Hamilton toward RBG's priorities. And all the rest of our funding, which is about 65%, 70%, comes from our charitable activities, gate donations, memberships, all of those things. So again, I believe there are places where that, thanks. I'll get back to that one, Ken, thank you. No. My understanding is that our administrative costs are around 10 to 12% of funds raised for our charitable work. But that's not a number I have at the top of my head, but that's for all of RBG. Does that help with your question, Joe?
Yeah. It right now kind of worried because of the COVID thing. Nobody's going anywhere, and funds have not been raised. I'm sure you haven't had any money.
Well, it's been a tough one. What I can relate is that because we are a non-governmental charitable organization, we've been able to get funding support from some of the things that have been out there, like the federal government COVID relief for companies.
Okay, yeah.
So we've actually come through COVID to this point, 11 months of it, with no permanent layoffs. Our staff is intact.
Good.
We've received some great donations. People have been generous, but we're also always looking for opportunities to serve the public and raise funds by doing good, by doing right, or whatever that term is.
Yeah.
So we have some prosaic things, like we raise funds from our parking lots.
Yes.
Our parking lots where there is a connection to a nature sanctuary, we charge for parking.
Yes.
We don't charge at the gardens because we raise funds there from the gardens. So we charge at the nature sanctuaries. Membership is strong right now. We've got a wonderful group of members, and about half of our members in general support RBG because of the nature sanctuaries.
Yes.
They make use of the trails and all those things. So again, I haven't got the most recent figures, and they're with our finance folks. We're going through our annual audit right now. But we've come through a year of this, and we're together as a group, and we're actively planning for recovery from COVID. So if it's any reassurance, we're very strong on where we're going.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. There was a question about Councillor Kelvin Galbraith in Aldershot, who's a lovely gentleman, but as far as I know, we're not related directly. If you go back 900 years ago in Scotland, we probably were, but not more recently.
Okay, well, Dr. Galbraith, thank you on behalf of all of our members for this presentation this morning. I found it to be very thought-provoking and most timely. And given that spring is around the corner, maybe some of us will be able to get out and walk some of those trails that are in our own backyards.
Yeah. No, the trails are available. We've had amazing response. I mean, this is the one thing we're trying to understand from COVID. We've got more people on our trails now than ever before. And it's wonderful, it's encouraging, but it's also putting pressure on those trails. We need to do work like repair the surfaces of the trails in response to all this use. So it is very encouraging.
Well, that's great. Thanks again for coming this morning. And you're free to leave the meeting at any time at your pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for having me in, and I wish you the very best. Stay safe in COVID.
Good. As we close this February meeting, I also wish to thank all of you attending today. This is, I think, a record for us for coming out. And to our Zoom masters who continue to make this possible, to them. To all of you, please stay safe until we meet again. And remember that this session has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel by Bob Lalonde within the next few days. And all members will be advised at the time when it's uploaded. I remind you that the date of our next meeting is Thursday, March 18th, 4 weeks away, when the speaker will be Jeff Saunders, who will be zooming in from the UK to share with us his tall ship journey from the Panama Canal to Tahiti. And this again will be very appropriate as we get into the spring time season. And I've had the pleasure of being on a tall ship for about 10 days, and I look forward to this exciting presentation. Also, don't forget that the March meeting will include our annual general meeting, and we encourage you to attend this formal part of the meeting because we need your attendance and your vote. So please show up and get any other members that you know in Provis to do so as well. We're going to be moving into our end of meeting meet and greet breakout session following the termination of the formal part of our meeting. So I encourage each one of you to remain for this. So I declare the formal part of the meeting terminated.